The Karen sisters struck again, but this time they crossed a line I never thought anyone would dare cross. Linda and Susan, my nightmare neighbors with their matching speak to the manager haircuts, had somehow managed to park their cars inside my garage while I slept. When I discovered their audacity that Tuesday morning, I knew it was time for the ultimate revenge. I couldn't believe my eyes. There I was, coffee in one hand, car keys in the other, staring at not one, but two cars sitting inside my garage like they owned the place. A bright yellow Honda Civic and a silver Toyota Camry, parked side by side as if this was their personal parking lot. What the hell? I muttered, nearly dropping my coffee mug. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was already running late for work and now I had to deal with this, whatever this was. I mean seriously, what kind of person just drives into someone else's garage and parks their car like it's totally normal? I walked around both cars looking for some explanation. Maybe there was a note? Maybe someone was playing a prank? Maybe I was still asleep and this was just some weird nightmare? But nope. Two cars, locked tight, sitting in my garage like they belonged there. The yellow Honda had a Karen for HOA president bumper sticker. Of course it did. And the silver Toyota? A speak to the manager parking permit hanging from the mirror. I should have known. Let me back up a bit and explain how I got into this mess. My name is Jake, I'm 32 and I work as a software developer. I bought this house 2 years ago because it was quiet, had a great garage for my woodworking hobby, and the neighbors seemed normal. Keyword seemed. The Karen sisters, Linda and Susan Peterson, moved in next door 6 months ago. And let me tell you, the moment they arrived, the peace and quiet of our little neighborhood went straight out the window. From day one they acted like they owned the entire street. First, it was complaints about my grass being too long. It was literally 2 inches high. Then my music was too loud. At 2 p.m. on a Saturday, I was playing acoustic guitar, not running a rock concert. Then they decided my car was parked too close to the property line. It wasn't, but try explaining basic property laws to people who think the world revolves around them. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that Tuesday morning. I had left my garage door open the night before because I was expecting a delivery early in the morning. It's a safe neighborhood and I'd done it plenty of times before. Big mistake. Apparently, the Karen sisters saw this as an open invitation to make themselves at home. So there I was, staring at their cars in my garage, trying to process what kind of mental gymnastics led them to think this was okay. I checked my phone, 7:32 a.m. I needed to leave in 8 minutes or I'd be late for an important client meeting. I marched over to their house and rang the doorbell. Multiple times. Linda answered the door in a pink bathrobe, looking like I had personally insulted her entire family tree. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "but your cars are in my garage." She looked at me like I had just spoken in ancient Greek. "What are you talking about?" she said, clearly irritated that I had the audacity to ring her doorbell before 8 a.m. "Your cars. Yellow Honda and silver Toyota. They're parked in my garage. I need them moved. Now." Linda rolled her eyes, and called back into the house. "Susan, the neighbor boy is complaining about our cars again." "Again?" I said. "This is the first time your cars have been in my garage." Susan appeared behind Linda, still in her pajamas, looking equally annoyed. "What's the problem now?" she asked like I was some kind of chronic complainer. "The problem," I said, my patience wearing thin, "is that your cars are parked in my garage and I need to get to work." "Oh, that," Susan said casually, like we were discussing the weather. "Well, our driveway is being sealed today, and we couldn't park on the street because of street cleaning. We saw your garage was open, so we figured you wouldn't mind." I blinked. "You figured I wouldn't mind?" "It's just for today," Linda added. "We'll move them tonight." "Tonight?" I practically shouted. "I need to leave for work right now." "Well," Susan said with a shrug, "maybe you should plan better. We can't move them until the sealant on our driveway dries." And then, I kid you not, Linda actually closed the door in my face. I stood there on their porch for about 10 seconds, wondering if I had somehow slipped into an alternate reality where basic human decency didn't exist. Then I heard them laughing inside the house. Laughing. That's when I knew this wasn't just inconsiderate behavior. This was war. I called my boss and explained the situation. Thankfully, he's a reasonable guy and agreed to reschedule the meeting. Then I called a taxi to get to work, which cost me $45. $45 because my neighbors decided to use my garage as their personal parking lot. All day at work I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about those cars sitting in my garage, and the smug look on the Karen sisters' faces when they basically told me to deal with it. When I got home that evening, I expected to find my garage empty. Instead, both cars were still there. I checked the time, 6:30 p.m. Plenty of time for a driveway sealant to dry. I went back to their house and knocked on the door. This time, Linda answered with a glass of wine in her hand. "Oh, it's you again," she said. "What now?" "Your cars are still in my garage." "Oh, right," she said, not looking sorry at all. "Well, it turns out the sealant needs until tomorrow to fully cure. Can't risk it." "So you're keeping your cars in my garage overnight?" "Just one night," Susan called from inside. "Don't be so dramatic." "Dramatic? Dramatic?" I took a deep breath and tried one more time to reason with them. "Look, this is my property. You can't just park your cars in my garage without asking. It's trespassing." Linda laughed. "Trespassing? Oh, please. It's not like we broke in. Your garage door was wide open. If you didn't want people parking there, you should have closed it. That's not how property rights work." "Well," she said, taking a sip of her wine, "maybe you should call the police if you're so upset about it." The way she said it, with that smirk on her face, told me she didn't think I'd actually do it. She thought I was all talk. "You know what? Maybe I will." Her smirk faltered for just a second. "You wouldn't. Try me." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Linda's eyes went wide. "911, what's your emergency?" "Hi, this isn't an emergency, but I need to report trespassing. My neighbors have parked their cars in my garage without permission and refused to move them." I saw Linda frantically gesturing to Susan inside the house. After a brief conversation with the dispatcher, I was told an officer would be by within the hour. "This is ridiculous," Linda huffed. "We're just trying to be neighborly and you're calling the police like some kind of lunatic." Neighborly would have been asking permission first. She slammed the door again. Officer Martinez showed up about 45 minutes later. He was a middle-aged guy with a patient demeanor who looked like he'd dealt with neighbor disputes before. I explained the situation and he listened carefully before going to talk to the Karen sisters. I could hear raised voices through their front door, but I couldn't make out the words. When Officer Martinez came back, he looked slightly amused. "Well," he said, "technically they are trespassing. But they claim you gave them permission by leaving your garage door open. That's insane." "I agree. I told them they need to move their cars immediately, or they could face charges." "And?" "They said they can't move them until tomorrow because of their driveway situation." I wanted to scream. "So what happens now?" "Well, I can't physically force them to move the cars tonight, but I've made it clear that if they're not gone by tomorrow evening, they'll be in serious trouble. I've also documented everything so you have a paper trail if this escalates." After Officer Martinez left, I sat in my living room trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't park in my own garage. I couldn't get to my woodworking tools. And worst of all, the Karen sisters had basically gotten away with it for another night. But as I sat there, getting more and more frustrated, an idea started to form. A beautiful, perfect, absolutely justified idea. The next morning, I got up early and watched from my window as Linda and Susan finally moved their cars out of my garage and into their freshly sealed driveway. They didn't knock on my door to apologize. They didn't even wave. They just drove off like nothing had happened. I waited until they were both gone, then I went out to examine my garage. Everything seemed fine, but the principle of the matter was what bothered me. They had violated my space, cost me money, made me late for work, and showed absolutely no remorse. That's when I noticed something interesting. In their rush to move their cars, they had left my garage door wide open. And sitting right there in the corner was something they had obviously forgotten: a spare key to their back gate that must have fallen out of one of their cars. I picked up the key and examined it. Then I looked at their house with its sealed driveway and I started to smile. If they thought they could just use my property whenever they felt like it, maybe it was time to give them a taste of their own medicine. I spent the rest of the day planning. See, I had been scheduled to go on a 2-week vacation to visit my sister in Colorado the following week. It was all arranged, plane tickets, rental car, the works. But now I had a much better idea for how to spend those 2 weeks. The Karen sisters had established a precedent, right? They had decided that an open garage door was an invitation to park wherever they wanted. Well, two could play that game. That evening, I waited until both sisters were home and settled in for the night. Then I put my plan into motion. First, I moved my car out of the garage and parked it on the street. Then I backed my pickup truck, which I usually kept parked in my driveway, right into their garage. Their door had been left open about 6 inches, probably for ventilation while the driveway finished curing. Just enough space for me to slip inside and hit the button to open it fully. I parked my truck right in the middle of their garage just like they had done to me. Then I used their spare key to lock the back gate, effectively trapping anyone who might want to access the garage from the rear. Finally, I went home and closed their garage door using the button inside. The next morning, I was up early with my coffee, watching from my kitchen window for the show to begin. At exactly 7:15 a.m., I heard a car start up next door. Then I heard it again. Then I heard shouting. I casually strolled outside to check my mail, and saw Susan standing in her driveway, hands on her hips, staring at her closed garage door. "Morning, Susan," I called cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She whipped around to face me. "Did you see anyone near our garage last night?" "No, why?" "Someone parked their truck in our garage and we can't get it open." I gasped in mock surprise. "Oh no. That's terrible. Who would do such a thing?" Linda came storming out of the house at that moment, her face red with anger. "It was you," she screeched, pointing at me. "You parked your truck in our garage. Now why would I do that?" I asked innocently. "Because you're trying to get revenge for yesterday." I pretended to think about it. Well, I did see that your garage door was open when I got home last night. I just figured you wouldn't mind, since you said an open garage door was an invitation to park there." Susan's mouth fell open. Linda looked like she was about to have a stroke. "This is completely different," Linda yelled. "How so?" Because it's our garage. And yesterday was my garage," I pointed out. "But you said I was being dramatic about property rights." "Move your truck right now," Susan demanded. I checked my watch. "Oh, I can't do that. I'm leaving for the airport in about an hour. 2-week vacation to Colorado. My truck should be safe in your garage while I'm gone, right?" "You said it was just being neighborly." The look of horror on their faces was absolutely priceless. "You can't leave your truck here for 2 weeks. Linda screamed. "Why not? You said it was no big deal when you did it to me." "That was different. We only left our cars for 1 night. Actually, it was 2 days, I corrected. And you cost me money and made me late for work. But hey, I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe call the police?" "Oh wait, you said that was an overreaction." I turned to go back inside, but Susan grabbed my arm. "You have to move it. We need to get our cars out." "Sorry," I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. "Like you said, maybe you should have planned better. Besides, I can't move it until I get back from my trip." "What trip?" Linda demanded. "Colorado. Leaving in an hour, back in 2 weeks. Didn't I mention that?" The screaming that followed was probably heard 3 blocks away. Linda called me every name in the book, while Susan kept demanding I move my truck immediately. I just smiled and waved as I headed back inside to finish packing. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find both sisters standing there with what looked like a peace offering, a plate of cookies. "Look," Linda said, trying to sound reasonable, "we may have gotten off on the wrong foot yesterday. How about we call it even? You move your truck and we'll forget the whole thing." "That's very generous of you," I said, taking the plate of cookies. "But I don't think we're even yet." "What do you mean?" "Well, let's see. You cost me $45 in taxi fare, made me late for an important meeting, used my property without permission for 2 days, refused to move your cars when I asked politely, laughed at me when I was upset, told me to call the police like it was a joke, and never apologized. Now you want to call it even because you're inconvenienced for, what, an hour so far?" Susan's eyes started twitching. "So what do you want?" "I want you to understand what it feels like to have your property violated and your schedule disrupted by inconsiderate neighbors." "Fine. We understand. Now move your truck." "Do you though? Because yesterday you seemed to think it was no big deal." "We get it. We're sorry. Move the truck." "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But I really can't move it right now. My ride to the airport will be here any minute." Right on cue, my taxi pulled up. I grabbed my suitcase from inside and locked the front door. "Have a great 2 weeks," I called as I got into the taxi. "Try not to park in anyone's garage while I'm gone." The taxi driver, who had clearly heard the shouting, chuckled as we drove away. "Neighbor trouble?" he asked. "You could say that. Leaving them with a little surprise?" I grinned. "Something like that." The flight to Colorado was the most relaxing I'd ever had. I kept imagining the Karen sisters trying to figure out how to get their cars out, and it made me smile every time. My sister picked me up at the airport and immediately noticed my good mood. "You seem unusually happy for someone who just dealt with a 3-hour flight," she said. I told her the whole story over dinner, and she laughed so hard she nearly choked on her wine. You locked their cars in their garage? She gasped between laughs. They locked my car out of mine first. This is the best revenge story I've ever heard. But what happens when you get back? We'll see. Maybe they've learned something about respecting other people's property. Over the next few days I got regular updates from my other neighbors. Mrs. Chun from across the street texted me photos of the Karen sisters standing in their driveway looking frustrated. Mr. Williams next to her sent me a video of them arguing with what looked like a locksmith. Apparently they had tried to get into the garage through the back, but the gate was locked, thanks to their own spare key. They had tried to force the front garage door, but it was solid and wouldn't budge. They had even called a locksmith, but he told them it would cost $800 to break into their own garage, and they'd have to prove ownership first. The best part? They couldn't even call the police for the same reason I couldn't the first night. Technically, I wasn't doing anything illegal by parking in their open garage. On day 4 of my vacation I got a call from an unknown number. Hello? Is this Jake Peterson? The voice was professional official. It's Jake Morrison, but yes. This is Sergeant Johnson with the local police. I'm calling about a neighbor dispute involving a truck parked in a garage. My heart skipped a beat. Had they somehow gotten me in trouble? Yes, that's me. Can you explain the situation, please? I told him the whole story from the beginning. When I finished there was a long pause. So you're saying they parked in your garage first without permission and refused to move their cars when you asked? Yes, sir. Officer Martinez documented it all. And now you've parked your truck in their garage? Their garage door was open when I got home. They established the precedent that an open garage door is an invitation to park there. Another pause. Then, to my surprise, he chuckled. Son, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never heard of someone using someone else's logic against them quite so creatively. Am I in trouble? Well, technically you're doing the same thing they did to you. And since they told Officer Martinez that an open garage was fair game, let's just say they can't really complain now. So what happens next? I told them the same thing I'd tell anyone in this situation. Work it out between yourselves like adults. Maybe they'll think twice before parking in other people's garages in the future. After he hung up, I felt a wave of relief, but also a twinge of guilt. Was I being too harsh? Was 2 weeks excessive? Then I remembered Linda's smirk when she told me to call the police. I remembered Susan rolling her eyes and calling me dramatic. I remembered them laughing after they closed the door in my face. No. They had made their bed. Now they could lie in it. The rest of my vacation was fantastic. I went hiking in the Rockies, visited some amazing breweries and spent quality time with my sister and her family. Every few days I'd get updates from the neighbors back home. The Karen sisters had tried everything. They called a garage door company, but were told it would take 3 weeks to get a technician out, and it would cost a fortune. They'd looked into renting a different garage, but nothing was available short-term. They'd even tried parking on the street, but it turned out there were restrictions in our neighborhood about long-term street parking. The best update came from Mrs. Chin on day 10. She sent me a photo of the Karen sisters washing their cars in the driveway with a garden hose and bucket, looking absolutely miserable. They've been doing this every morning, her text read. I think they're starting to realize how much they took their garage for granted. On day 12 I got another call from Linda herself. Jake, she said, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. Please. We need our garage back. I told you I'll move my truck when I get home. Can't you come home early? We'll pay for your flight. I was actually touched by how desperate she sounded. Almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'm sorry, Linda, but I can't change my plans. I'll be back in 2 days. 2 more days of this? Hey, look at it this way, by the time I get back you'll have experienced almost exactly what you put me through. 2 weeks of inconvenience because of someone else's inconsiderate behavior. There was a long silence. Then quietly she said, We really are sorry about what we did. I believe you. So you'll move your truck as soon as you get back? Absolutely. And then we can all go back to being normal neighbors? I thought about it. They had put me through hell, cost me money, made me late for work, and showed no remorse whatsoever. But they had also learned their lesson the hard way. Sometimes the best teacher is experience. Linda, if you can promise me that you'll never again park in someone else's property without permission, and that you'll treat your neighbors with basic respect and consideration, then yes. We can go back to being normal neighbors. I promise, she said quickly. Susan promises too. We both promise. Good. I'll see you when I get back. The flight home was bittersweet. I was excited to see how the Karen sisters had fared, but I was also a little sad that my perfect revenge was coming to an end. My sister dropped me off at the airport with a hug and a warning. Don't let them off too easy, she said. Some people only learn through consequences. Don't worry. I think they've learned. When the taxi pulled up to my house, I saw both Karen's sisters standing in their driveway waiting for me. They looked tired, frustrated, but also humbled. I paid the taxi driver and walked over to them with my suitcase. Ladies, I said politely. Jake, Linda said. Thank you for coming back. It was a scheduled trip. I was always coming back today. Susan stepped forward. We owe you an apology. A real one. I waited. What we did was wrong, Linda continued. We had no right to park in your garage without asking. We were inconsiderate and rude and we're sorry. We're also sorry for how we acted when you asked us to move the cars, Susan added. We should have moved them immediately. I nodded. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, will you move your truck now? Linda asked hopefully. I looked at both of them for a long moment. They had clearly learned their lesson. They looked genuinely remorseful. And honestly, I was ready for this whole thing to be over. Yes, I said. I'll move it right now. The relief on their faces was immediate and obvious. I went inside, grabbed my keys and opened their garage door. My truck was right where I'd left it, covered in a thin layer of dust but otherwise fine. As I backed it out of their garage and into my driveway, both sisters stood watching like they were witnessing a miracle. Thank you, Linda said as I got out of my truck. You're welcome. Just remember what we all learned from this experience. We will, Susan promised. We definitely will. As I wheeled my suitcase into my house, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served. Not through the legal system, not through homeowners association rules, not through shouting matches or police reports, but through good old-fashioned natural consequences. The Karen sisters never parked in my garage again. In fact, they went out of their way to be considerate neighbors from that point on. They even brought me a proper apology gift a few days later, a nice bottle of wine and a card that said, "Thank you for teaching us to be better neighbors." About a month later, I was working in my garage when Linda knocked on the door. Jake? Can I talk to you for a minute? Sure, what's up? She looked embarrassed. I just wanted you to know that we told the whole story to our sister when she visited last week. Oh yeah? What did she think? Linda laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had learned to laugh at themselves. She said we got exactly what we deserved, and that you were a genius for using our own logic against us. Your sister sounds like a smart woman. She is. She also said that if we had just asked you politely in the first place, you probably would have said yes. I thought about it. You know what? She's probably right. Really? Really? If you had knocked on my door and explained the situation with your driveway, and asked nicely if you could use my garage for a day or two, I probably would have helped you out. Linda shook her head. We made such a mess of things. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them. Well, we definitely learned. Susan jokes that we got a master's degree in property rights and neighbor relations. I laughed. That's one way to look at it. As Linda headed back to her house, I reflected on the whole experience. Was I proud of what I did? Honestly, yes. The Karen sisters had pushed the boundaries of acceptable behavior and refused to back down when confronted politely. Sometimes, people need to experience the consequences of their actions to truly understand why those actions are wrong. Did I go too far? Maybe. 2 weeks was a long time to leave my truck in their garage. But they had established the precedent, and they needed to understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end of their own behavior. The best part is that our neighborhood is actually more peaceful now than it was before the whole incident. The Karen sisters are considerate neighbors who ask before doing anything that might affect others. And word has spread throughout the neighborhood about what happens when you mess with people's property without permission. Mrs. Chun told me that the story has become legendary in our little community. She said people refer to it as the Great Garage Standoff of 2025, and it's become a cautionary tale about treating your neighbors with respect. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to hold up a mirror to their behavior. The Karen sisters didn't understand why their actions were wrong until they experienced the exact same treatment themselves. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. But hopefully I'll never have to. Because now everyone in the neighborhood knows what happens when you park in Jake Morrison's garage without permission. And you know what the best part is? The Karen sisters and I are actually friends now. Real friends. We've had barbecues together, we help each other with yard work, and Linda even gave me some great tips for my woodworking projects. Sometimes, the best way to end a conflict is to see it through to the logical conclusion. The Karen sisters wanted to establish that property rights didn't matter? Fine. I gave them exactly what they asked for. And in the process, we all learned valuable lessons about respect, consideration, and the golden rule. So the next time someone tells you that an open garage door is an invitation to park wherever you want, you can tell them the story of the Karen sisters, and how they learned the hard way that what goes around comes around. Just make sure you have 2 weeks worth of vacation time saved up first.